Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of the Get Psyched show. In this episode, I am joined by Louis Gallagher. Louis currently studies at the University of Stirling while working and leading in a number of roles across the sports sector. We speak about his incredible work with the charity Scottish Sport Futures and the skills in working with vulnerable young people. His cricket coaching and what his values are when it comes to coaching, as well as how he deals mentally with his performance in cricket. We also chat about young people and their importance in leadership. Louis speaks amazingly well, so I hope you enjoy this podcast. Thank you. Hi Louis, how are you?
I'm very good, George. Thank you very much for having me.
No, it's a pleasure to have you on. Thanks for joining us today. Could you just give us a wee introduction about yourself, about your sort of career path so far? I know you're only young, but you've been involved in plenty. So just an overview of what you've been up to before and what you're doing currently.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Louis Gallagher. I wear many hats across things in sport, basically. So I started off in Perth, where I grew up, and got involved with cricket when I was 15 years old. Started playing some cricket and coaching some cricket, and then from there, everything's been a bit mental over the last couple of years. Started working with cricket development in Perth and Kinross after I left school. Had a gap year, whilst also being on the Young People Sport panel, which of course is where we met with Sport Scotland, which was a pretty awesome experience. I'm also a youth worker with Scottish Sports Futures. I did that in Fife for quite a long time, and then now I'm over in Stirling with the Stirling team in Bannockburn. And I'm the new youth director at Scottish Club Sport as well, taking over from your fine self. And I recently have gained a role with Netball Scotland as well. I'm going to be a mentor for their ambassador programme, working with Caitlin Williamson, who's absolutely fantastic. And I also mentor on the now sixth cohort of the Young People Sport panel. So that's just a handful of things. Along with that, I'm a student at the University of Stirling studying sports development and coaching. Also play hockey and shinty. I'm repping the hockey jumper today. Got the hockey jumper on. But nice. I play hockey and shinty at the uni and do a little bit of work with like Active Stirling and things, a little bit of kind of sports development stuff there. And probably the thing that takes up most of my time is I'm also the head coach at Doon and Dunblane Cricket Club, which is a fairly new club. We've actually just merged with Doon. We were Dunblane before, so been going for about 3 years now, Dunblane, but I've only been involved since last December, so I'm just kind of coming up on a year at the club, and it's been an absolutely fantastic experience and loving every minute.
Good stuff. Thank you so much. I don't know how you found time to join me today for this podcast, just showing the amount of things you're involved in and the amount of work you do in sport, but that's the reason I wanted you on, because you can offer so much insight and experience. To start off with then, you mentioned how you're a youth worker with Scottish Sport Futures. Could you talk to me a wee bit more about what Scottish Sport Futures is and your role with the organisation as well?
Yeah, it's good. Nobody ever kind of tells you how to describe SSF, so I think everyone kind of takes their own little spin on it. But for me, the way that I always talk about SSF is it is using sport as a bridge to getting young people either re-engaged with education or onto different outcomes. And so essentially we work with predominantly young people who have had adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs as they're commonly known, young people who struggle with education, don't get on so well in mainstream school for, it can be any variety of reasons. Maybe they've got additional support needs. Maybe they have had a really tough upbringing. Maybe their parents have been involved with crime. Perhaps they themselves have been involved with the police before, different things like that. And so we use sport as a buy-in. We use that as the tool that we can then get young people into a sports hall or a classroom or whatever it is. And then from there, we can work with them to not only improve their active life and make them sporty, but also actually get some better outcomes as well overall. So that can be things like working on their communication skills, working on their leadership, and things like that. Just trying to set them up in the best possible situation so that, by the time they've finished with us, they are on to college, work, university, or they're back into school and they're enjoying themselves. And so we tend to work predominantly with young people who are sort of between the ages of 12 and 18. So really kind of people who are in high school, really getting to grips with what they're going to go and do with the rest of their lives. So It's quite high stakes. I think we play a really important role, but it's pretty awesome as well because you get to be that role model for that young person, but not in, you're not a teacher, so there is that slightly different relationship there as a youth worker. But it's really incredible, and the work that SSF does across the board is amazing, and I just play a very, very small part in it. So yeah, it's been a really cool experience.
Nice one. And I guess you've called yourself a youth worker with SSF, and even though sport is in the title and you're involving sport, you've not called yourself a sport coach. What would what would sort of a session look like with some of the young people you're working with? Are you focusing only on the skills and just using sport, or is it let's develop their sporting skills on the side as well?
Yeah, so I should say the official job title, so I don't get in trouble from the staff, is you're a physical activity coach slash youth worker. So that's what the job title says, and so that encapsulates a lot. I just say youth worker because it's shorter, but I mean, a typical session, it depends on the program. We have a variety of different programs, ranging from our twilight sessions, which are just drop-in sessions, so anyone can come along, any young person can come. They don't have to be from the kind of backgrounds that I've just described. So we might get some young people who are really high achievers who just want to come along and play a bit of sport. Or equally, like you've got like our Chance to Be program, which is our kind of really intensive program, where we work with young people over the course of like 12 weeks, and we actually get them out of school. And so like that program is referral based. So we actually, usually the guidance teachers or staff within a school will actually refer these young people to us. So that, you got to bear that in mind, and that every session does look quite different. And also across the country, different staff teams will do things differently depending on what works in the area. But for me, I mean, I was actually at a session last night, so I can kind of run you through what we do. Usually we will kind of come in, we'll do a bit of a debrief with the young people, just see what their week's been like, what have they been up to, just checking in. And then from there we might go on and play some, I like to play some drama games usually, kind of get some people, talking to each other, working in teams and doing some little challenges and things. And then we'll usually have some sport involved within every session. So whether that is, we're going to go outside and have a game of five-a-side football, or we are going to, it can be really simple games like you're going to hit a balloon up in the air, or you're going to throw a tennis ball at a target, or whatever it is. They're really, you can be very open. It doesn't have to be sort of organised sport. And then often we will have some sort of youth work topics involved in the session as well. So it might be that we're going to focus a particular session on alcohol and drugs. It might be that we're going to talk about sex and relationships one day. It might be that we're going to talk about smoking and vaping. Whatever it is, we're going to usually focus in on a particular issue that week. And so literally last night, for example, I did a wee session on boundaries and relationships and how that works. And so we got the young people getting active, and then they were going and writing down on some whiteboards different thoughts that they had about what are boundaries, what do appropriate boundaries look like, different things like that. And so that's just kind of one example, but I think that probably gives you a decent picture of what we do.
Yeah, nice one. I think it's clear you've sort of got a theme and then your activities, and you sort of blend it all together to create a really engaging session. It sounds really good. What sort of benefit have you seen from young people? Have you seen progression over time with working with the same people? Have you got some like stories or people you've got in mind where you've seen a huge improvement or a huge sort of turnaround in their direction as a young person?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of the time, what ends up happening is a lot of these young people, particularly if they struggle within school, is that the staff at SSF sort of become their support network, and although we might only be seeing them for a few hours a week, they really look forward to that, and that is a key kind of relationship for them in their lives, particularly with the development coordinators, my bosses. They have some really close relationships with the young people. I mean, definitely in Fife, I can think to back when I started about almost 2 years ago now, and still some of the same young people who were coming then still coming now, but most of them have actually progressed through our program. So they may have started on a Chance to Be an Actors to Grow, a referral based program. So the school's gone, this young person really needs an intervention, we're going to send them to you, we know that they're all right with sports, so let's see if that works. And then from there they may have completed that program. I'm thinking of a couple of examples in my head, a couple of girls that I've worked with for a long time who were in those programs when they were maybe 14, 15, did really well, then started coming to our Twilight programs, getting involved with sport, playing a lot more sport. Twilight tends to centre around the sport side a bit more. And then progressed doing a little bit of coaching. Maybe if it's just they're going to do a little warm-up game with everyone at the start, it can be as simple as that. And then they've actually gone on to progress into our Young Leaders program. So SSF also has a Young Leaders program, which often encapsulates the young people that we've worked with on different programs before, but can also have young people who have never been involved with SSF before. They'll come on a Young Leaders program with us, and we will do kind of coaching skills and disability inclusion, and we will look at how they can lead in education, how they can go on and lead in a workplace and stuff like that. And so definitely a few people who have progressed through all of those programs and are now well on their way. There's a young guy who I've worked with in Fife for quite a long time. He's now doing some kind of community coaching with Cowdenbeath Football Club. And, he's really kind of going for that football coaching now, and he's progressed through our programs. And so, there's so many examples like that across the organisation. So a lot of the young people really do stick with us for quite a long time, which is amazing.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. And I think you mentioned it at the start of your point as well, but that SSF workers can almost become like the main point of contact for a lot of young people. Do you see sort of an importance in having that consistency with relationships? So if young people are coming to a session, but they know they're going to see a familiar face, and you're able to build up that relationship over time and that trust, is that something that's quite important when working with these young people?
Absolutely. You mentioned the word trust there. That's what I was going to say. It's just all about trust, because most of these young people who are coming to us at SSF and similar organisations, they're young people who have often been let down by significant adults in their life, whether that be parents, whether that be teachers, whether that be brothers, sisters, whatever it is. And so, immediately if you're coming into a session where you're meeting lots of new staff members for the first time, your levels of trust, are going to be down here. Whereas if you are a young person who had a really supported upbringing and is really comfortable in themselves, then they're going to kind of come in and go, oh yeah, people are great, people are nice, I can trust anyone. So the young people that we're working with are coming in very often tense. They've really got a wall up. And the only way that we can break those down, in my experience, is actually having that consistency. And if you work with a young person over the course of a year or 2 years or 3 years, then you're going to start to find that relationship actually builds a lot more. And all of those young people who have referenced, they have had some key relationships with staff members over the course of 2 years. I mean, it's a really good example. There's a young lad who I've worked with before, and it was one of my first sessions when I was a lead coach in Fife, and kind of taking on a lot more responsibility. I'd probably been pushed a bit, and I was like, right, this is a bit of a challenge for me. And I'd done a game during a session, and he got really frustrated. He would really struggle with his anger, and he was this close to like throwing a rock in my car window. I mean, quite literally. And that is probably the most intense that a session's ever got for me personally, where I've been like, oh God, this is, it's the way I'd handled the situation probably wasn't the best. Now that young lad and me have a brilliant relationship where if I see him, he'll be telling me about everything that he's been up to. He's progressed now. He's really getting involved with boxing, been a really key outlet for him. And that's, probably a year and a half on from that initial circumstance. And so if I was to just give up on that at that point and go, you've just tried to throw a brick in my car window, you absolute nutter, no chance, I'm never going to kind of coach you again, then that'd have been that, and he would have gone off, and who knows what would have happened since. But the fact that I went, right, he's in a particular place, I need to understand where he's coming from. He's got a lot of things that are making him really frustrated in his life. I'm going to work with him. I'm going to build that relationship slowly. And then now we're in a great place where I can go and chat to him and we get on really well and he trusts me. And so I think you absolutely are right there that the consistency is really, really key.
Yeah. It leads quite nicely on to my next point as well, or my next question. It was like, you're working with vulnerable people who, in contrary to maybe your cricket coaching, where you've got parents who are encouraging their kids to come along and bring them themselves, to working with vulnerable people, your sort of average is going to be very different. So there might be triggers, or there might be things, just like you've spoken about with this lad, that you might not get to that extent in other situations. So do you coach in a different way? Do you have a different style, a different approach when working with these vulnerable people? And like, how do you adapt your environment differently? So do you make sure there's less distractions, or you've got more support, or what are the differences sort of between maybe coaching your cricket and working with these vulnerable people with SSF?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the difference in some ways you have to be the same, and in some ways you have to be different, right? You can't try and be a version of yourself to suit the session because people see through that. But then equally, if you just came into every session and did the exact same thing, it's not going to work with different
Yeah.
groups, as you say. So I think it's tricky, and it's something that I've definitely battled with a lot to try and get it right and try and find the right way for me to act in a particular session. A lot of it's about knowing your people, knowing who you're coaching. So as you kind of briefly mentioned there, like it's about knowing what sets them off, what are their triggers, what's the things that I need to be aware of. And so that comes with time usually. You might not get that right on the first, second, third session, but eventually once you start to learn about people, then you'll know, right, I know that she is really going to struggle if I put her. So take a cricket for example. Like I've got one girl that I coach at the club who she really likes batting, but bowling is a real struggle for her, and it makes her quite upset because she knows that she struggles with it. So it's like, right, I'm not going to go in and go, right, we're doing 2 hours of bowling here because I know that that's going to be a nightmare for her. But if I can maybe dip her toes in, right, we're going to do 15 minutes here. I'm really going to focus with you. And then the rest of the time, we're going to do a batting game. So I know that you're going to have a great time. That's me
Yeah.
tailoring that session a little bit. I'm not making a big change. I'm still doing the thing that I need to do, but I'm just being aware of my people and how my actions are going to affect them. So I think that's definitely something that I always think about. You mentioned environment there, also a key point. I think having that support in there, people, having multiple coaches with SSF, we always do sort of have 2, 3 at least coaches in a session. That's really important. If it's a cricket class, at a primary school in Dunblane that I'm going to coach, I can deal with 25 screaming primary fours and just myself. That's okay. I can do that. But if I'm going into that environment with SSF, it might only be 4 or 5 young people that we're dealing with, but we might actually need 3, 4 members of staff to be comfortable within that situation, so that the young people feel supported, but also that the staff feel supported. Because sometimes you might not be getting it right, and you need a different member of staff to come in and make a positive impact. So it's constantly something that's changing, and I think it's always just about evaluating as a coach. How am I doing? How can I improve? You never want to get that false sense of security that you're thinking that you're smashing it. You always need to be reviewing and always need to be evaluating. So I think that's really, really key.
Nice one. Good stuff. Sort of, I guess, final question around SSF is, it's a very sort of unique skill set that you need to build up as a youth worker, and those things you might not have experienced before through coaching or through your involvement in sport. So, what sort of training, if any, did you undertake as part of coming into this role with people, maybe working with difficult people in a way? Has this transferred into other situations? Have you seen yourself perform better in other situations that might involve challenging people?
Yeah, I think you're kind of half right. I think that you do need a certain skill set, but people, I think training is overrated. I think if you think about kind of being online on courses, I did a bit of that. When you start SSF, you get your kind of induction process. You got to go and do some kind of online webinar type things, and that's fine. That has a purpose. But if you think that is going to set you up to walk into a room of 10 young people who have had a variety of different experiences, all want to do different things within a session, forget about it. You need to go in and make 100 mistakes before you feel confident. Like that's just the brutal truth of it. Everyone's a terrible coach when they start. Nobody starts off really, really good. And I think just going in and being comfortable to make those mistakes, that's really where the learning comes. We don't have many staff. We're always looking for staff. We're always hiring. And if you are listening to this and you are someone who has a sporting background, maybe you really like coaching rugby or football or tennis or whatever it is, and you think, oh, that sounds interesting, but oh God, I could never, go in and do those sessions and kids are going really angry and, this girl's crying over here and how do I deal with that? Like nobody should feel comfortable with that until you've done it. So I think so many people get quite afraid of that youth work concept and doing a bit more than just coaching sport. But the reality is everyone has it in them because it is just people, it's just relationships, and you do it every day. If you are someone who works within sport, if you're someone who coaches, you're actually doing it all the time. You're just not aware of what you're actually doing to address every individual person and make them really feel addressed and make them feel looked at and focused at within a session, but you do it. And I think SSF just really highlights the level to which that matters, because the consequences of not delivering a good session are a little bit higher. Whereas I think of it myself as like a cricket session, I can deliver a 5 out of 10 session or I can deliver a 9 out of 10 session at my club. And the response that I'm getting back from the young people doesn't look very different. But if I'm at SSF and I deliver a 5 out of 10 session, I'm going to know about it. So I think that's a really, really key thing, is that you just kind of don't be afraid of making mistakes and just go out and actually get that experience. So like SSF are really open to, if coaches just want to come and get a bit of experience and shadow some people, or if you want to come and work for us, like just come and do it. Don't stop making excuses or feeling like you're not going to be good enough, because until you've done it, you don't know. And so, yeah, there's definitely a place for training and upskilling and things, but absolutely, I think the best way to learn is just by doing it and exposing yourself to it.
So, as well as working at SSF, Louis, you've, as you mentioned, you've been coaching with Dunblane and Doon Cricket Club for the last wee while. It's quite a relatively new club, as you mentioned. So there's I guess a lot of new players. What's your sort of best way of going about building confidence in new players who maybe not have played much cricket before, quite new to the sport? How do you get them engaged, involved, happy, and wanting to play more cricket?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know that I actually know how it happens. It just kind of does. I think always the cricket comes second for me. I mean, it's are you, as you said, are you coming in? Are you enjoying the session? Now that can be you are coming in and you are playing some games of disco tag, and you are chucking a ball at some stumps, and you're maybe missing 10 times out of 10. But if you're enjoying yourself within that session, that's number one for me. If I don't tick that box, then it doesn't matter how good you are at cricket. Like, that is always secondary for me. And I think that's perhaps a shift that a lot of sports coaches are making at the moment, and a lot of younger coaches, I notice, is a bit of a change from perhaps how some older coaches do it, in that it's not about your ability at the sport. It's actually about just, are you engaging? Are you coming back every week? Are you having fun? And then after that, we can sort out the actual technical side of the game. So I think for me, certainly with kids that are coming in new, it's just about making them feel involved, making sure that everyone kind of knows their name, making sure that everyone's talking to them. Do they have friends within the session? Can I, make those links happen? And that's been a key thing for me, because when I came into the club, we'd gone from a point of, when they'd started off about a year before I'd come in, or 2 years before I'd come in, they were at about 30 young people within the club. It had then dipped to about 15 by the time I got involved. So when I came in, I was like, right, I don't mind if we're losing every single game we play this season. And by the way, we only won one, so it wasn't like I massively overachieved. But I want to grow that. I want to grow those numbers. I want everyone to be coming back every week to cricket, having a good time, bringing their friends, and we get more people in. And thankfully, by kind of July time, we'd had about 30. So we'd doubled our numbers back up to where we were originally. And that for me was really, really important. And as I just said, like, we won one game with our kind of softball side this year. And so that wasn't, ideal. But the fact that everyone was losing most weeks and still coming back, that's a huge sign for me that I'm doing a half decent job. And now we're in a really good place where we've merged with Doon, and we're sitting at about 75 members, I think, across kind of adults, juniors, women's team and everything. And so we can now start to look a bit more to performance side of cricket and how are we actually developing players. We've just had some of our players selected for Scotland trials and for regional pathway, which is a really huge achievement for the club. So yeah, it's I think it's just about how you do that prioritisation, because a lot of people will put the performance side first, but I think that's the wrong way to go about it. I always think it's about enjoyment before you actually think about how good any particular person is at the sport.
Yeah, I think it's a really excellent point, and it comes back to that environment, creating a positive and happy environment. I think especially for young people, like, obviously, like, they all want to win, but at the end of the day, if they've not won but they've really enjoyed themselves, they're going to come away happy most of the time. And I think as well, noticing, as you said, it's about developing that just enjoyment first and then looking at the skill set later. Young people, like,
And
especially
it's
sort
hard,
of,
right? Because
yeah. On you go, on you
I was
go.
just gonna say, as coaches, we're some of the most competitive people, right? So the way that I approach my own game as a player, I'm incredibly outcome based, and I'm very like, oh, have I scored runs today or have I not? And that's what I care about. But so for me to then go, right, I've got to put my own ego at the side here, not care about the results, and just focus on the enjoyment. And even like the way you praise players, I think that's a huge thing. As a coach, if you are a coach and you're listening to this, really think about it. How do you praise players? Do you praise them when they slam dunk, when they score a goal, when they drive it down the middle, when they score a try, whatever it is? Or do you praise them when they have sprinted the length of the pitch to try and get back and make a tackle and they've just missed? And do you praise them when they have taken on a really ambitious three and they've hit the rim and it's gone out and they've just got really unlucky? Like, when are you praising them and how are you praising them? I always think you're either praising outcome or you're praising process. And process for me should always be the one that you're praising 90% of the time. And so that's something that is really important to bear in mind, because although you can think in your head, right, I'm putting fun and enjoyment first, it's really hard to actually do that in practice because most of us are very competitive people as coaches. So it can be quite tricky.
Yeah, it's such a good point. It's something in a previous episode we spoke about with Misha about this idea that we need to focus on the process because you can't control that outcome. So there's no point worrying about it, focusing on it. Have you done the correct steps? Have you done what you can control? It's I think there was a study at some point that looked at like children, and it was like the way they were praised. So if they were praised for being, they did well on a test or something, and they were praised for being, oh, look, you're really intelligent. They had this idea that, oh, I'm intelligent, so I can I can do anything. I don't need to work as hard. Whereas when they were praised for, well, you worked really hard to get that result, that they got this idea that, right, okay, that's what I need to do. I need to work hard. So I think praise is such an important thing, and a way I like doing that is always the sort of the feedback for praise. So if you're gonna tell someone, look, try and do this a bit differently, can you alter it a bit differently? Make sure you watch them until they succeed to then praise that success. So they get this idea of it. Okay, if I listen and if I improve it this wee bit, that's the way I want to do it. That's the way I'm gonna feel rewarded. So yeah, I think it's a really key point, and as well, like young people have got such a short attention span, and I think that's only getting shorter as well, especially with sort of kids, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Like they just want the next like dopamine hit all the time. So I think being as a coach, when you're able to have lots of ideas, and even if it's just small changes with rugby with young kids, I always bring a couple different balls, so a tennis ball, like a mini rugby ball, and just that wee change, they just love it. Like they think it's something completely different. So having that brings that easy way to get more enjoyment, just a quick bit more enjoyment into your sessions. But it's a really great point. Looking at, I guess, this idea of process and outcome as well. Maybe talking a wee bit about playing cricket yourself as well. How do you sort of like come back from mistakes and deal with mistakes in your game? Obviously, you said you're really critical of your game, and in cricket, you got quite a lot of opportunities to, I guess, make mistakes as well as make good plays. So in a game, what is your process? Do you struggle when you make a mistake, or are you able to bounce back quite quickly?
Yeah, it's something I've grappled with a lot. I'm a very hypercritical person most of the time on myself. It's a bad habit. It's funny, I don't, it's probably the opposite of how I am as a coach. I'm really positive as a coach, and then as soon as I'm a player, I'm the opposite. I think back to, it was a couple of years ago now, and I was playing a game, midweek game. I still remember it, Meagle at home, first ball. I went out to bat. I was opening the batting, and I took the first ball and I got bowled first ball. And the brutal thing about cricket is you prepare for, maybe it's half an hour before the game, you're thinking about it, you're practicing, your visualization, all that. And you go out and you're expecting, I'm going to be batting for a good 45 minutes, an hour here. I'm going to really build an innings. You get out first ball after 2 minutes, you're done. You're into the changing room at the side, and you've got to wait like another hour or two before you can go out and make an impact again on the field. And it's so hard. It's probably the thing I dislike the most about cricket, apart from the weather. But I think for me, a big thing has been changing the framing of how am I contributing. And so last season I was vice captain. I'm not a great cricketer, to be honest. I'm a very average cricketer, so I'm third 11 at Perth, and I was vice captain last year for the third 11. And because of our captain Jack's a brilliant coach as well. He's been a bit of a kind of mentor to me. He's a little bit older than me, and he's a level 2 coach as well. And he was away with our juniors a lot on Sundays when we had games, because all of our junior teams made it to Scottish finals day this year, which was an incredible achievement for the club. So he would be away with them. And so I would then have to rise to that captaincy role. And so I think I probably captained about 5, 6, 7 games this past season. And it was amazing how much I performed better, actually, under those circumstances. There's always a lot of talk about that, particularly at a professional level. Do players perform better when they're captain, or do they crumble? And so we've seen good examples in cricket, like Andrew Flintoff became captain, had a meltdown, and then had to give it up. And as soon as he wasn't captain, he was great again.
Yeah.
And equally, you've got players like Ben Stokes, the current England Test captain, who, as a captain, just takes it all on board and he just delivers, and because he loves that adrenaline, he loves that responsibility that comes with being a captain. And for me, it was the latter, because always as a captain, and you don't even have to be captain, just being in a leadership role, you have to put other people before yourself, because ultimately, whether you perform or not is secondary. It's whether the team is performing, whether the team's going to win or put in a good performance. And so, I actually started thinking a lot less about my own game, because I was thinking about the field that I'm setting, and I'm thinking about, the young lad at the other end who I'm batting with, who's probably feeling really nervous. How can I make him feel more at ease? And so what happened is I then started to take so much pressure off my own game, because it was just all about the team. And so I think I probably had my best average this year that I've ever had batting, because I just kind of managed to change the framing of how I was thinking about my performance. It wasn't about me, it was about the team. So that's certainly the way that's worked for me. But I know that different people have different ways to kind of get around that.
Yeah, that's a really good example. I really like that. And it's your comparison as well to international cricket, where it's just the type of person you are. You either step up and sort of love that responsibility, or you almost crumble under it. And it's sort of, I guess, the career you've had beforehand, your experience beforehand, but also just the type of person you are, and it's how you can work around that. It's really interesting. Have you ever sort of thought about or worked with your mental game where you've gone, I really need to work on this, doing stuff off a cricket pitch, or has it never really come into sort of scope while you're playing cricket?
It does, but it's kind of I actually sort of consciously ignore it a lot of the time. But equally, there's little things actually. So, I mean, I'm a batter, and so all of my kind of focus is always on batting. And so I like to be very, very relaxed. That's when I perform the best. And the only reason I know that is because I literally score more runs when I'm in a more relaxed mindset. And so for me, and this is very unpopular, most batters would be the absolute opposite. So most batters in cricket, particularly at professional level, want to be in the zone. They want to be zoned out from what's going on around them, just looking at the bowler, looking at the ball. But I like to be completely sort of distracted in between balls, and really just, because that for me just puts me at ease. And so a big thing for me in terms of the mental side is just cracking jokes in between each ball. Obviously in cricket you've got that constant dialogue between the teams. The batters and the fielders are always kind of having a wee go at each other, having a laugh. And so most people will try and ignore that, but I like to engage with that. I like to talk, because for me that then I'm not thinking about the last ball and that mistake that I made that almost got me out. I'm like, right, I'm joking about your trainers, and then I'm back in, all right, okay, here's the next ball. And so that's been a really huge thing for me. Equally, really trying to simplify the things that I'm trying to do as a batter. So I remember a game away actually at Amigo about a year and a half ago now maybe, and this bowler was bowling quite well against me. And I knew that I've got out to him before, and I was like, this could be a bit of an issue. And so I basically decided, I was like, right, if the ball is in If the ball's on my stumps, if it's on my legs, if it's a ball that could get me out, I'm not going to play an attacking shot. Doesn't matter if it's slow, if it's something that I could hit, I'm just going to defend if it's there. I'm only going to play attacking shots when it's outside my off stump, when I know that I'm not going to get bowled. And so for me, that then, right, it was simple because I wasn't even thinking about making a decision. It was like, right, I'm just looking for where the ball is, and then I know what my decision is. And that really helped me to simplify what I was doing, because I didn't have to make 4 or 5 decisions, which is often how it is as a batter. You're thinking about the flight of the ball and the pace and the pitch and, you know, the game situation and what your partner's doing. And there's so many things to think about. So for me then to just think, right, where is the ball? That was all I was thinking about. So that then produced a really good performance from me that ended up winning my team that game. So that's just kind of an example of how I tend to approach it. But, you know, equally, I know that so many players are different. You will find a lot of players that will just be like, right, I'm in the zone and I am just not going to think about anyone else. I mean, literally just before I was talking to you, actually, I was listening to Stuart Broad's on the High Performance podcast, just come out today. And his whole thing is about after every ball, he wants to look to the sky so he can like zone out and not have to think about what anyone's saying. Whereas for me, I'd probably be like, oh no, I want to talk to people. I want to kind of keep that flow. Whereas for him, it's like, right, I need to zone out. So just shows you that there's, you know, some very different opinions on that.
Yeah, I guess because if you're the sort of person that can be, I mean, they're trying to achieve the same thing where you're able to zone in and zone out when you need to. When you need to hit the ball, you can hit it how you want it. So, for example, for you, like if you're stuck in your own thoughts, it can become, I guess, it can become negative quite quickly if you didn't hit it exactly how you want it. So that distraction's a really good way. You almost forget about the last shot you played, and then you're back in the moment. If you're joking, you're in the moment. You're just, you're speaking to someone, and then you're back in the moment when you need to hit the shot. Whereas to someone else, that other distraction can be difficult. So I'll focus on something else, focus on my sky, then I can focus on my shot. When we chatted with Misha in a previous episode, his whole thing is this staying in the moment, forget about what's happened, forget about what's going to happen, just stay in the moment. So everyone's got different ways of doing that, but it's really interesting to hear. And I guess with you're simplifying your game as well, it's such a good way to do it. Like, especially at grassroots sport, when you've maybe got 2 sessions a week for training and then a game, you're trying to feed, you've got so much information, so much detail to get in such a short period of time. But when it becomes a match day, you can have 5, 6, 7 things that you've worked on during the week, and it just becomes like an overload. So almost simplifying your game and keeping it to 2 or 3 things can really help. There's a technique I used with one of the teams last year called 3-point focus. And it was sort of like 3 points the night before a game you'd write down, and you'd sort of memorize these things. And you'd almost forget all the worries about all the things you've worked on. It'd be like, if I can get these 3 things right, you'll be sorted. Just like with your batting. If it's a ball that could get you out, play a defensive shot. And it's just like small things like that in those moments where it could go 50-50, see you have a positive outcome. So yeah, it's good to hear. And I think like you don't even think about sometimes how much mental side plays in your sport. And then when you start talking about it and realizing, you're like, it's massive. Like it's such a huge aspect. How do you sort of ever involve or speak about when you're coaching players about sort of a mental side, or is it all just sort of about technique?
Depends on the level, probably. But yeah, the more I've coached, the more I've realised that the importance of the mental side is really there. I recently just completed my level 2 qualification, and so much of that was about the mental side, whereas the level 1 is really not. And so I suppose that's part of the age thing as well. You're thinking about when players are kind of getting into their teens and they're thinking about maybe going and playing a higher level than just kind of having a hit with their mates. Then you're starting to think about how can we get those marginal gains? How can we improve? And the mental side is somewhere where most young players won't think about that. So if you can introduce those thoughts, then I think that's pretty important. I'm trying to think of an example that I've maybe had with some of my players. A big thing for me, and it's quite a common thing that you'll see with cricket teams, is when we're fielding, it's having that energy in the team. So it's they'll think about, can I physically go and catch that ball, or can I pick it up and throw down the stumps? But actually, a lot of it is how are we approaching the game, and you might think that is just right. I'm thinking about where I'm standing, I'm thinking about how fast I'm running and all that. But actually, if everyone's up energy wise, if everyone's chatting, everyone's getting really positive and geeing each other up, then all of a sudden those physical things start to happen because you're just sort of in that positive mindset. So you are running a little bit harder and you are just really a little bit more focused in the game. And particularly fielding within cricket, it's a strange thing where, you'll maybe be in the field for hours on end, and it's quite easy to kind of zone out and not really think about what's going on in the game. So keeping that chat, keeping that positive energy is something that I really encourage as a coach, because it keeps players involved. So even if the ball hasn't come to you for half an hour, you're still chatting, you're still encouraging the bowler, so you're still involved. And then when the ball does come to you, you'll be focused and you'll be ready.
Yeah. I was going to ask you as well about the, because I know you've recently done your level 2, and I wasn't expecting it to be much about the mental game, but that's really good to hear. What sort of did it involve with your level 2?
So there was a lot about kind of analysis of players and how do players approach their game in a slightly different way. So I think it was kind of all about that, setting different targets, setting goals, and a lot about dealing with the frustrations of players as well. That was in there. I think a lot of it was really about simplification. Esther de Lange, who was the lead she was the tutor. She's played for the Netherlands women, and she's really kind of incredible coach and incredible tutor. And her whole thing is basically about, can I break the messaging down into one or two key points? Kind of like what you're saying there with the 3-point plan thing, where, instead of my players thinking about these 10 different elements to their batting, it's just, can I do these couple of things really well? And, over the course of a game, can I do these 3 things? And even if we don't win the game, if I'm doing those 3 things, then I know that I'm getting somewhere, the process is working. And so there's a lot about that. But it's definitely somewhere where I look to kind of grow, I think, more as a coach as well, because probably my knowledge isn't quite where it could be. With regards to the mental side of the game, so it's always somewhere it's good to learn about, and I find it quite interesting as well, which is always good.
Obviously, you say you're interested in learning about sort of the psychological side. Do you find that there's much resources out there, or there's things that you can get a hold of to learn about it, or have you not really looked, or do you just not know where to look?
No, yeah, I mean, I suppose there's 2 different sides to it I'm thinking about in my head. I think initially, obviously, I've at uni studying sport, and I did a psychology module last year, and I thought it was the most boring thing ever, because it was all reading. We weren't really thinking about it in a practical sense. So it really wasn't for me. But I'm a big lover of podcasts, as you'll know. And so recently I've really gotten into high performance podcasts with Jake Humphreys and Damien Hughes. And so that is so much of that is about psychology, but they're not necessarily telling you it's about psychology. They're actually just discussing, with athletes, how do they approach the game and what are they thinking about. And all of a sudden you start to go, oh, right, this is sports psychology right now, but it's in practice. And it's actually, when Tyson Fury, when you got knocked down by Deontay Wilder, what was going through your head? How did you get up? How did you approach the rest of the fight? Or, as we were talking about Stuart Broad there, how did he got hit for 6 sixes in a row in Durban, and everyone's thinking his career's over. How did he come back, and what was his thought process? And, so I think for me, certainly the psychology side is always more interesting when it's very kind of related to real world situations, and it's about how do people actually deal with those in practice.
Yeah, definitely. And can you see sort of, I guess, sports psychology growing a bit more in grassroots sports? So, for example, like it's maybe not direct sports psychology, but a large focus on the mental game in your cricket qualification. I know that doesn't happen across many qualifications in sport. Can you see that changing? Can you see more of a focus and emphasis on improving people's mental side of the game as well as the tactical, technical, and things like that?
I hope so, because it's really important, and certainly in terms of players approaching sport in a healthy way and enjoying it. Obviously, the psychology is a huge part of that, and teaching players how to deal with adversity is a huge thing. Probably something that we've not been so good at across multiple sports in the past. Thinking about kind of growing up in football myself, never really had a discussion about what did we do when we're losing and how do we deal with that and not be harsh on ourselves and things. And if anything, it was the opposite. Coaches could be very harsh, even when you're 10, 11 years old and things. And so I hope that coaches coming through now have more of an exposure to sports psychology and its importance, because I think about a lot. There's a huge age difference there, and I think the older you go, coaches tend to be far more based around outcomes and far more thinking about the physical side of the game, and even just things like coming in and just running for a training session for a certain period of time. That's something that you'll look at younger coaches now will do less of, because they're thinking about the game in a different way. Can they actually get in a classroom and think about the tactical side of the game and use the whiteboard and be drawing things up and thinking about the psychological side of the game, getting players to set goals and set targets? Like, that's something that, when I was growing up playing football, that's never really something that would be thought about. So I'm hoping that the further we go, coaches are going to start to think about these things more and more.
So as you said as well, when you introduced yourself, Louis, you're involved in a huge amount of sort of leadership programs and opportunities within sport in Scotland. As a young person yourself and having had experience in these roles, do you see there's an importance in involving young people in decision making and having their viewpoint as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think coming into there's two sides to it. Number one is development of young people. So, albeit the Sport Scotland board might not have someone under the age of 25 on the board at the moment, but so many of the people who might be on the board when they're 40 or 50 years old are people who are young people now. And so, how do you set those people up to reach that level and to reach a standard where they can contribute to sport and be the managers and be the board members of the future? Well, that is youth leadership opportunities. Why wait until someone's 25 or 30 before you're giving them real responsibility and giving them decision making? And so, I think that's a huge side of it, and that kind of personal development side, something that I've experienced a lot. I've had a lot of people put a lot of trust in me and give me opportunities. Been very fortunate in that regard, and so now I feel so much more able to go and take on that sporting sector and actually back myself and go, yeah, you know what, my opinions really do matter, and I actually have the experience to back it up. And then the other side of it is, if you go to any kind of Scottish Club Sport Conference or Scottish Women in Sport Conference or any coaching conference or whatever it is, so much of the content is around young people. I mean, so much of the sporting industry is just about young people and how the young people get a really good experience in sport, how the clubs attract more young people, how do we make sport a more welcoming environment, how are we more inclusive. And if those decisions about how we do all of those things are made by people who aren't young, then obviously they're not necessarily going to have that immediate lived experience of understanding what it's like to be a young person now and how those experiences need to be tailored to young people to make it a really good environment. And so, it's strange to me that more governing bodies haven't put more effort into engaging young people. I've been very unfortunate that I've been involved with a few who have, but there's still so much more work to be done. And I think if organisations are actually serious about, making sport an even better space for young people than what it already is, then you need to have young people in those decision-making processes, and you need to be developing young people so that they can feel comfortable and feel able to go and take part in those decision-making processes. So hopefully that kind of covers it there. But yeah, I mean, clearly I'm very passionate about it, and if any organisations are ever wanting to know more, I'm just like, right, come and talk to me, because I'm sure I can persuade you as to why this is something that you should do if you don't already.
As your experience in these youth leadership roles and working with organisations, has that sort of influenced or made a difference to how you approach your coaching and how you approach your dealing with young people in these situations, because you're almost able to see the bigger picture in ways?
Yeah, a little bit. I think it's really opened my eyes to how broad sport can be. Leaving high school, I think I may have told you this before, but I applied for an English degree one year, and then I applied for a film degree the next year, and then I also applied for drama school both years. I didn't apply for sport at all. I got through clearing to get into Stirling, and it was a whole big last minute fiasco. I kind of had a change of heart, and it took me a couple of years, even being on the young people sport panel, to realise that actually, even though I don't really want to be a high performance coach, that's not really the side that I want to go down. But I didn't realise that a sport development manager existed until I was about 19. And so, people don't have that awareness of how broad sport is and how you can contribute to the sporting system in a way that might not be high performance but can still be really valuable. And so that's something that I definitely try to tell young people about now and try and get the word out on that whether I'm working with SSF and talking to a young person about how they can maybe go and be a worker for SSF in the future if they're on our programs, which happens quite a lot actually, or in my coaching, maybe it's like, right, I know that you might not reach that high performance standards for cricket, but do you want to go and develop these coaching skills now? Because I reckon you could go and be a really great coach. And so I think that's a huge part of it, is that just making people aware of how many opportunities are out there across sport.
Sort of to look at wrapping up now. Just having covered everything you've spoken about. Obviously, your work with SSF, all your experience with your cricket coaching and other coaching before, and then your huge range of leadership roles across the sports sector in Scotland. If a listener could take one thing away from everything you've said, and you could put across one point from all your experience, what would that be? What would your sort of one piece of advice be to someone who's looking to get involved in, or already is involved and looking to develop themselves in the sports sector?
Yeah. I think over and above everything else, just go for it and expose yourself to things and be okay with not being amazing at something straight away. You can spend so much time planning and preparing and trying to set yourself up to be good at performing in sport or coaching or working in development or whatever it is. But until you actually do it, you just it's not the same. And so, for me, I have this saying that I always say to a lot of my coaches, which is make the wrong decision rather than making no decision. So basically what I mean by that is if you're coaching in a session, I have a lot of kind of volunteer coaches who I work with, a lot of them are quite young. And so I'll say to them, I'll be like, don't come and ask me what game you want me to do. Just go and do a game with young people. You have the reason, you know what to do. Go and do it. If it's a nightmare and it doesn't work, great. We've learned. We know that we maybe shouldn't do that with that group again. We need to make it easier. We need to make it harder. We need to change the skill, whatever it is. But don't just stand there and go, oh, right, I'm not even going to bother, because at least that way I won't have failed. But go and fail and make mistakes, because from there you can then work on it and you can, have so many more success. So how many more success? So much more success. So I think that's the one thing for me, is just have the freedom to make mistakes and just go for it.
Yeah, I love that. I use that saying as well, actually, when coaching rugby with fly
Yeah,
halves, and you've got to just organise the game the whole time. And I'm like, you're better to make a wrong call than just not make a call at all, because you make that wrong call, it's fine, you deal with it. But if you don't make a call, everyone's confused. No one knows what's going to happen. So yeah, I love that. It's that sort of, you can have that motto in life, like just do something. It doesn't matter if it's wrong, just do it, and then you'll learn from it. Yeah, awesome, good stuff. Well, Louis, a massive thank you for joining me today. It's been awesome to hear about all your work. I know you've been recently nominated for a coaching award as well, which just goes to show um, what you're achieving and what you're doing. And it's amazing to see the work you're doing and the impact you're having across sports. So thank you for joining us today.
thank you so much, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's been nice to catch up and have a chat.
Good stuff.